Alright, buckle up, because what I'm about to tell you is insane. Imagine you're me, married for years, life is smooth, maybe even a little boring, but hey, it's stable. Then out of nowhere, my nephew, who I practically helped raise, drops a bombshell on me that he's into my wife. Yeah, my wife. You think that's wild? Trust me, it gets way worse. I didn't think life could turn upside down like this, but the stuff that happened next? Let's just say it forced me to see my family, and myself, in ways I never saw coming. Ready? Let's dive in. I never imagined a family gathering would turn my life upside down. I'm Matt. For the last 17 years, I've been married to Jenna, and we've got a comfortable life together. No kids, just steady careers and the kind of stability that most people probably envy. Sure, things have become a bit predictable over the years, but I wouldn't trade what we have. Life was fine as it was, or so I thought. One Saturday, my brother Ben invited everyone over to celebrate his son Josh's 23rd birthday. Josh has always been a special kid to me. He's more like a little brother than a nephew, sharp, mature for his age, always seeking advice on something. Maybe it's because I don't have kids, but I've always taken a particular interest in him. I've enjoyed watching him grow, and I'm proud of the man he's becoming. He's intelligent, focused, and surprisingly wise beyond his years. I like to think I've had a hand in that. When Jenna and I arrived at Ben and Amanda's place, I felt the familiar warmth of family gatherings. The smell of roasted meats, the mix of voices, the easy laughter, it's the kind of scene that always puts me at ease. I saw Josh across the room, and he came over to give me a quick hug. Happy birthday, Josh. You're officially in your mid-20s now, I joked, slapping him on the back. He laughed, shaking his head. Not quite, Uncle Matt, but thanks for making me feel older. We laughed, and it reminded me how fast he was growing up. We all gathered around the table, and after Amanda brought out the food, everyone dug in, joking and sharing stories. It felt good, simple, easy, and familiar. After dinner, as the wine began to flow a little too freely, Jenna started chatting with Ben about work. She's always been close with Ben, they're both pretty driven in their careers. Meanwhile, Amanda had cornered me, showing off photos of their recent trip to the coast. I smiled, nodded, and offered the usual responses, but I could feel my attention wandering. Josh caught my eye from across the room, his face thoughtful, almost concerned. He excused himself from a conversation and came over. You all right, Uncle Matt? You seem a little distracted, he said, looking me straight in the eye, his voice low so as not to interrupt everyone else. I laughed, waving it off. Just a long week, Josh. Nothing serious. He nodded, but I could tell he wasn't entirely convinced. There was an intensity in his gaze, an awareness that was rare for someone his age. We exchanged a few more words, but he didn't press me further, and I was grateful for that. The rest of the night passed in a blur of small talk and laughter. It wasn't until much later, as the evening was winding down, that things took a turn I could never have anticipated. Jenna had had a bit more wine than usual, and she'd settled onto the couch, looking ready to fall asleep any second. I knew she'd regret it in the morning, but tonight she seemed relaxed and happy. When it was finally time to go, I managed to rouse her, and Josh offered to help get her to the car. Thanks, Josh. Appreciate it, I said, grateful for his help. Between the two of us, we got her settled in the back seat, and Josh closed the door with a quiet click. I looked over at him, intending to say goodbye, but something in his expression gave me pause. There was a hesitance there, something unsaid. Need a ride home, Josh? I offered, assuming he'd be headed back to his apartment downtown. He hesitated, glancing down the street before looking back at me. Actually, do you have a minute? I kind of wanted to talk to you about something. Of course, I replied, feeling a flicker of curiosity. He was usually an open book, so this seriousness caught me off guard. I motioned toward a quiet bench on the edge of Ben's front yard. Let's sit. We both sank down, and I waited for him to start. He took a deep breath, running a hand through his hair before meeting my gaze. It's about someone I've been close with. And I don't know how to handle it. I chuckled, relaxing a bit. Josh, if it's girl trouble, you're asking the wrong guy. I meant it as a joke, but he didn't laugh. This is different, he replied, his voice thick with emotion. It's complicated. She's older than me, quite a bit older, and she's in a relationship. I don't know if this is the right thing, but I can't stop thinking about her. I felt a pang of concern. It was clear this wasn't a casual crush or a passing attraction. Josh, you're 23. You've got your whole life ahead of you to find the right person. You don't want to get tangled up in something that's going to end badly for everyone involved. He nodded, but he didn't look relieved. Instead, he seemed to be battling with himself, his face a storm of emotions. I know, Uncle Matt. Believe me, I know. But I can't let it go. It's consuming me. I felt a surge of empathy for him. I remembered what it was like to be young, to have that overwhelming intensity where every feeling seemed magnified, and every moment felt like the end of the world. Josh, I get it. But maybe you just need some time and distance. Sometimes that's the only way to clear your head. He was silent for a long moment, and I thought the conversation was over. But then he looked at me with a gaze so full of raw vulnerability that it caught me off guard. The woman I'm talking about. It's Jenna. The world tilted on its axis. My mind went blank as I tried to process what he just said. Jenna? I managed to whisper, barely finding my voice. My Jenna? He nodded, and I could see the pain in his eyes. I didn't want to feel this way, Uncle Matt. I've tried to fight it, but I can't. She's incredible. She's beautiful, smart, kind, everything I could ever want in someone. I know this is wrong. I know it's impossible, but the feelings won't go away. I was frozen, torn between disbelief and anger. Josh, do you realize what you're saying? Jenna's my wife. You're my nephew. It's completely out of the question. He hung his head, clearly struggling with the weight of his emotions. I know. Believe me, I know. But I thought you should know. I can't keep pretending everything's fine when it's not. I needed to tell you. I took a deep breath, trying to regain my composure. This was too much. I felt like I was caught in a nightmare, but I couldn't wake up. Josh, listen to me, I said, my voice barely steady. This is something that has to end. Right now. There's no future in this. You need to move on, find someone else, someone who's free and available. He nodded slowly, the anguish clear on his face. I'll try, Uncle Matt. But I can't promise it'll be easy. With that, he rose to his feet and walked back toward the house, leaving me alone on the bench, reeling from the bombshell he'd just dropped. I sat there for what felt like hours, the quiet of the night pressing in around me as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. My nephew, the kid I'd practically helped raise, was in love with my wife. The next few days felt like a haze. I couldn't shake the conversation with Josh, and it replayed in my mind constantly, eating away at me. I was furious, confused, and deeply unsettled. Jenna, of course, had no idea. I watched her go about her routines, totally oblivious to the bombshell I was carrying, and it felt surreal. My mind couldn't settle. One moment, I was on the edge of telling her everything, but in the next, I wanted to forget any of it had happened. On Wednesday, I got a text from Josh. Can we talk? That was all it said. I stared at the screen, my stomach twisting. I knew I couldn't avoid him forever, but part of me wished I could. I agreed to meet him at a quiet coffee shop outside of town, hoping to keep this whole thing as discreet as possible. I arrived early, sipping coffee at a corner table and doing my best to calm my nerves. A few minutes later, Josh walked in, looking a bit lost until he spotted me and came over. He looked rough, like he hadn't slept in days, his normally cheerful expression replaced with something darker. Thanks for meeting me, he said, sliding into the seat across from me. He looked down at his hands, unable to meet my gaze. I took a steadying breath. All right, Josh. You wanted to talk. So, talk. He took a deep breath, still looking at his hands. I know what I told you the other night was a lot. I wasn't sure if I should say anything, but I couldn't keep it in anymore. I feel like I'm living a lie, hiding these feelings. Look, I said, trying to stay calm, we've all been through tough situations, but this is dangerous territory, Josh. If you're looking for advice, the only thing I can say is to let this go. Move on. You're young, you'll find someone else. Josh clenched his fists. You think I haven't tried that? I've dated other people, tried to forget about her, but nothing works. Every time I see her, it all comes back. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of his words. The love he described wasn't some passing attraction, and that made it all the more disturbing. Josh, you have to think about what you're doing. This isn't just some infatuation you can entertain. It could destroy our entire family. If you care about Jenna or me, you'll let it go. He looked up at me, a flash of defiance in his eyes. I know it's wrong, Uncle Matt. But I love her, and I know she feels something too. I've seen it in the way she looks at me sometimes, like there's something there. I can't ignore that. A chill ran through me. The idea that Jenna might share any part of his feelings was too much to bear. Josh, I said firmly, this ends now. Whatever you think you see or feel, it's not real. You're putting yourself through hell over something that isn't meant to be. You have to let it go, for everyone's sake. He looked away, biting his lip. For a moment, he seemed almost defeated. All right, he whispered. I'll try. But please, understand that this isn't something I can just turn off. I'll do my best to move on. We sat in silence for a moment, each of us lost in our thoughts. I could tell he was struggling, that he was in pain, but I couldn't allow myself to feel sympathy. This situation was dangerous, and it needed to be shut down immediately. He left quietly, his shoulders slumped, and I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness watching him go. That night, I went home and tried to act normal around Jenna. She was chatting about her day, completely unaware of the storm raging inside me. As I listened, I kept looking for signs, some clue as to whether there was any truth to Josh's suspicions. But she seemed genuine, her usual self, and that brought some comfort. Yet every now and then, a flicker of doubt would creep in, and I'd have to push it away. She didn't notice my strange mood, probably because I was doing everything I could to mask it. Over the next week, things were tense, to say the least. Josh didn't contact me again, and I avoided family gatherings. I didn't know what I'd say if I saw him. But the more time passed, the more the reality of the situation began to settle in. I knew I couldn't keep avoiding him forever, so I started preparing myself for whatever came next. A couple of weeks later, we had another family gathering at my parents' place. I felt anxious the entire drive over, wondering how I'd face Josh and if he'd tried to talk to Jenna. When we arrived, he was already there, sitting alone on the porch steps. His face lit up when he saw Jenna, but when his eyes met mine, I saw the hesitation, the same turmoil that had been haunting me. During dinner, I could feel him watching her, the glances he stole when he thought no one was looking. I felt like I was living in some twisted reality, forced to pretend everything was fine. As the evening wore on, the tension between us became almost unbearable. I caught his gaze once, and he quickly looked away, his face flushed with embarrassment. After dinner, Jenna was chatting with my mom in the kitchen, and I decided it was my chance to confront him, once and for all. I found him in the backyard, staring up at the stars, lost in thought. Josh, I called quietly, approaching him. He turned, his face a mixture of guilt and pain. Uncle Matt, he seemed to brace himself, like he knew what was coming. We need to end this, for good. I can't have you around if this is going to continue. I don't want to hurt you, but this isn't healthy. Jenna's my wife, and I need you to respect that. He nodded, but his gaze was distant, fixed on some point in the night sky. I know, Uncle Matt. I've tried to let go. I've really tried, but I don't know how. You're young, Josh, I said, my voice softening. I get it, you're going through something intense, but it won't last. You have to believe that. This will pass. You'll move on, find someone who's right for you, and this will all be just a painful memory. He looked down, his shoulders slumping. I know you're right. I do. But it hurts like hell. I understand, I replied, putting a hand on his shoulder. Just keep your distance for a while. Give yourself some time to move on. It's the only way this will get better. We stood there for a moment in silence, and then he turned, giving me a solemn nod before walking away. I watched him go, my heart heavy with a strange sense of loss. I knew it was the right thing to do, but part of me felt like I'd just severed a bond I'd cherished for years. When I returned inside, Jenna was waiting, smiling as she handed me a drink. I forced a smile in return, but inside, I was far from at ease. As the night wore on, I couldn't help but feel the weight of everything that had happened. I could only hope that Josh would honor his word and stay away, giving both of us the space to move forward. But a part of me feared that this was only the beginning of a much darker chapter in our lives. In the days that followed, I did my best to put the incident with Josh behind me. But despite my efforts, a tension lingered, subtle but insistent. Jenna noticed that I seemed distant, and she tried to draw me back with her usual warmth. I assured her I was fine, brushing off her concerns with excuses about work stress. She seemed to accept it, but I knew I couldn't keep avoiding the truth forever. Then, one afternoon, while I was at work, I received a message from Josh. My heart sank as I read the text. I can't do this, Uncle Matt. I need to talk to her. It was like a punch to the gut. I had hoped he would find a way to move on, to let go. But now, it was clear he hadn't. His resolve to speak with Jenna directly sent a wave of dread through me, and I felt my control slipping. Without thinking, I texted back, telling him to meet me at the park near his apartment that evening. I needed to try to reason with him, to make him see that this would only lead to disaster. I couldn't let him throw a bomb into our family's life. When I arrived at the park, Josh was already there, pacing restlessly under the dim light of a street lamp. His face was drawn, his shoulders tense. As I approached, he looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of determination and desperation. Josh, I started, trying to keep my tone calm. This has to stop. You need to give it up, for everyone's sake. He shook his head, his face tight with frustration. I tried, Uncle Matt. I really did. But every time I see her, it just gets worse. I can't keep pretending I don't feel this way. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. Josh, if you go to her, you're going to destroy our family. Jenna doesn't deserve this. She's done nothing to encourage you. You're just seeing things that aren't there. He looked at me, a flicker of defiance in his eyes. How do you know, Uncle Matt? Maybe she does feel something for me, and she's just as scared as I am to admit it. I felt a surge of anger. Listen to yourself, Josh. This is all in your head. You're letting your emotions cloud your judgment. Jenna is your aunt. She's my wife. This obsession of yours, it's going to ruin everything. He flinched, but he didn't back down. I can't just turn it off. I love her. And if there's even the slightest chance she feels the same way, I need to know. I took a step back, staring at him in disbelief. It was like he had transformed into someone I didn't recognize. The boy I'd watched grow up, the nephew I'd always trusted, was now threatening to dismantle everything I held dear. Josh, I said, my voice low but firm, you can't put your happiness above everyone else's. That's not love. That's selfishness. You need to understand that real love means sacrifice, not just taking what you want. He seemed to consider my words, his expression softening for a moment. But then he shook his head, his gaze hardening. I can't keep living a lie, Uncle Matt. I don't want to hurt you, but I need to be honest with myself. I felt a wave of helplessness wash over me. He was too far gone, too blinded by his feelings to see reason. Then I can't stop you, I said, feeling a sense of defeat settle over me. But know this, if you go to her, you're going to lose more than you realize. Once you cross that line, there's no going back. Josh nodded, a flicker of regret passing over his face. But I could see that his mind was made up. I understand, Uncle Matt. But I can't ignore this any longer. I turned and walked away, feeling a strange mixture of anger and sadness. I had done everything I could to stop him, but it hadn't been enough. The truth was, I didn't know what would happen next, but I could sense that the fragile piece in my life was about to shatter. Over the next few days, I watched Jenna closely, waiting for some sign that Josh had approached her. She seemed the same as always, kind, attentive, and completely unaware of the storm brewing in the background. I wanted to protect her from all of it, to keep our life untouched by this madness, but I knew that was impossible. Josh was determined, and it was only a matter of time before he made his move. One evening, as Jenna and I were having dinner, my phone buzzed with a text. I glanced at the screen, and my heart skipped a beat. It was from Josh, I told her. I felt a cold sweat break out across my skin. Jenna noticed my reaction, her brow furrowing in concern. "Matt? Is everything okay?" I forced a smile, doing my best to keep my voice steady. "Yeah, it's just something from work. I'll handle it later." But inside, my mind was racing. What had he said to her? How had she reacted? The thought of Josh confessing his feelings to Jenna filled me with dread, but I couldn't confront her now. I needed time to gather my thoughts, to figure out how I was going to deal with this new reality. That night, after Jenna had gone to bed, I sat alone in the living room, trying to make sense of everything. Part of me wanted to confront Josh, to demand answers, but I knew it would only escalate things. Instead, I tried to think about what I would say to Jenna if she brought it up, how I would explain this whole mess without revealing the full extent of Josh's obsession. But the next morning, when I saw Jenna, she acted as if nothing had changed. She was cheerful, warm, and completely normal. It was as if Josh had never spoken to her at all. I felt a mixture of relief and confusion. Had she brushed it off? Or was she just hiding her reaction from me? The uncertainty gnawed me, but I knew I couldn't push her for answers. I had to wait, to see if she would come to me. Days passed, and nothing happened. Jenna remained her usual self, and Josh stayed silent. I was left in limbo, caught between fear and hope, unsure if the worst was over or if it was still lurking around the corner. A week later, during a family gathering, I saw Josh again. He looked withdrawn, his face pale and tired, like he hadn't slept in days. When our eyes met, he quickly looked away, and I felt a pang of guilt. Despite everything, he was still my nephew, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had failed him somehow. But the strangest part was that Jenna seemed completely at ease. She treated Josh with the same warmth and affection as always, completely unaware of the turmoil that had been churning between us. It was as if Josh's confession had never happened, and I couldn't understand how she could be so oblivious. Later that evening, when Jenna and I were alone, I decided to take a chance. I couldn't keep living in the dark, pretending that everything was fine. I needed answers. "Jenna," I began, trying to keep my tone casual. "Has Josh said anything to you recently? Anything unusual?" She looked at me, her brow furrowing in confusion. "Unusual? No, he's just been his normal self." "Why?" I hesitated, trying to find the right words. I know he's been going through a rough time lately. I thought maybe he'd talk to you about it." Jenna shook her head, her expression softening with sympathy. "No, he hasn't said anything like that to me. But if he's struggling, maybe we should reach out. He might just need someone to talk to." I forced a smile, nodding. "Yeah, maybe you're right." As we continued with our evening, I felt a strange sense of relief. Somehow, Jenna seemed completely unaware of Josh's confession, and that meant there was still a chance to keep this whole mess contained. But deep down, I knew it was only a temporary reprieve. Josh's feelings weren't going away, and sooner or later, he would find a way to bring them to the surface. I was trapped in a nightmare, caught between the woman I loved and the nephew I cared about, unable to find a way out that wouldn't destroy us all. A couple of weeks passed, and I thought the worst was behind us. Josh seemed to have found someone new and started fresh. Family gatherings became calm again, and Jenna and I even managed to take a trip, reconnecting and finding our way back to each other. But despite my attempts to let go of everything that had happened, a nagging feeling wouldn't leave me. Then one evening, I got a message from Josh, "We need to talk." Instinctively, I knew this couldn't be good, but I agreed to meet him in the park. When I got to our usual spot, he was already sitting on the bench, a strange calmness on his face. "Hey, Uncle Matt," he greeted me quietly as I sat down beside him. I braced myself for what he was about to say. I wanted to tell you the whole truth," Josh began, looking away as he spoke. "When I said I had feelings for Jenna, that was just part of it. We crossed that line, Matt. We slept together." I felt the world spin. I had suspected something, but hearing it out loud made the pain sharp and raw. I clenched my fists, struggling to hold my composure. Josh continued. "Yeah, I know it was wrong. But it's like it helped me understand everything. She told me I had to move on, and now I realize she was right. I thought it was love, but it was just passion. And I'm grateful to her for it. For being who she is, incredible, strong, and willing to be herself no matter what. I'm lucky to have an aunt like her." He looked at me, his eyes a mix of relief and gratitude. It was as if this act had somehow given him the release he needed. "I know it might sound strange, but I'm glad it happened," he added. "I'm ready to move on now. I don't need that connection with her anymore." I stared at him, processing the mix of rage and hurt crashing over me. Everything I thought I knew about trust and family honor felt shattered. But his honesty and even gratitude, twisted as it was, put everything into perspective. I took a deep breath, finding the strength to respond. "Josh, I'm glad you found the strength to admit it and let it go. Now you understand that everything has consequences. I hope you find your way, but remember, this chapter in our family won't ever be forgotten." He nodded, giving me a subdued smile, and left, leaving me alone with a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. We both knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but after this conversation, it was clear that we were each finally free to move on, each of us along our own path.